These two activists from Russia's LGBT network helped her escape to a country that we can't name, and they're working. The main artery named after Vladimir Putin, a catwalk for glamorous Chechen women. Gender roles are mapped out here. Women will marry. For men, fighting and mixed martial arts is a way of life after childhood spent during two vicious separatist wars. We came here just before lockdown to find out what it's like for LGBT women living in a part of Russia where women cannot even get a passport without the consent of a male relative. Mikhail Engiev has spent his life defending human rights in Chechnya. He and his staff have faced numerous threats for the work that they do. But he says he doesn't believe there are gay women in the Chechen Republic.
Нет, я, например, не думаю, что здесь подобное есть вообще. Я никогда не слышал, и это сложно представить в нашем обществе. Это вообще невозможно даже представить.
But they do exist. In Moscow last year, we met a couple who had managed to escape and were trying to flee Russia. They did not want to show their faces and told us that Chechen security officials were trying to blackmail them.
Мне посчастливилось уехать из Чечни еще до первой волны гонения геев и трансгендеров в Чечне, но это меня не спасло. Все равно меня нашли и угрожают.
They told us about the Islamic Medical Center in Grozny. The LGBT networks say lesbians are often brought here to try and convert them to heterosexual life by exorcising their demons. It's a center for traditional Islamic medicine, where exorcisms are standard. This doctor had agreed to show us around.
Здесь богослов читает Коран. Если какие-то симптомы, проявления есть у человека, да, там после чтения Корана, я позже расскажу, что это. Если какие-то проявления есть, то они уже на втором этаже в индивидуальном порядке у целителя дальше продолжают свое лечение.
We had hoped we could ask him about women brought here for conversion therapy because of their sexuality. But then he receives a phone call and we're told to leave. The director is close to Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, and he hasn't had approval from the top.
Одержимость джиннами – это состояние.
This ad on Chechen TV shows an exorcism in process, a way to restore harmony, the advert suggests, if you're having problems with your wife. Losonova says that what happened to her was brutal.
Он избивал меня область солнечного сплетения. Тем самым он говорил, что изгоняет из меня джинна. Он бил меня туда тонкой палочкой в течение часа. Это было больно. И кричал мне в ухо Коран.
The Chechen Investigative Committee has assigned a number to Losonova's case. But there is a culture of impunity here. The Kadyrov regiment, for example, behind these walls, is notorious for torture and unlawful detentions. So here on the left you have the headquarters of the Kadyrov regiment, and on the right there in that yellow building is the headquarters of the local investigative committee, which goes some way to explaining why there has been such a failure to investigate or prosecute allegations of torture by law enforcement officials in Chechnya.
Платье хочу себе шить на весну или на лето.
These three aren't confident that the case will go anywhere, but by speaking out, they hope Lorsonova shows others that they're not alone, that however difficult
आ गई यार 20 मिनट again to Liverpool now, where the city is still celebrating being named champions of the Premier League last night. It is the 90th title win for the football club, but their first in 30 years. The manager, Jurgen Klopp, is already looking to the future, saying today that Liverpool's success is far from over. Our sports correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
This is what the party looks like when you've won the Premier League for the first time. The celebrations at the Liverpool Hotel went on until almost breakfast time. The manager Jurgen Klopp showing his dancing feet not quite as sharp as his football brain, but he was surprisingly fresh-faced the next morning. First of all, congratulations, Jurgen. Speaking with the people of Liverpool, they seem to have a fondness for you that goes beyond football. Do you feel that closeness, and can you explain why that is?
I feel very close to the city, even when I cannot go in the city. I love the way they see the life. I love the way they want to be different, are different, but are very special in a very good way. And we both come from a region where we speak a pretty strong and strange dialect. So where I'm coming from, nobody understands the world outside that, and that's with Scouse pretty similar.
He arrived in Merseyside 4.5 years ago, a hot property in football management, but without the ego of others.
I'm a totally normal guy. I'm the normal one, maybe, if you want it is.
It's proved a perfect match, the 53-year-old from Germany's Black Forest, taking Liverpool from 10th in the league to the title. He also shares their socialist principles and values. What about Jurgen Klopp?
He's just a fantastic, amazing human being. He's now immortal in this city.
He's part of the furniture now. He's an adopted Scouser now, you know what I mean? So everyone loves him.
I love that man. I have the same bait. I even emailed him and he hasn't answered me. I'm gutted we put that up. Jurgen, answer me, please.
It's significantly quieter at Anfield than it was on Thursday night. People have been understandably criticised for gathering here in their hundreds when lockdown is still on. What's also understandable though is that physical feeling of excitement. Football's not just a game here, it's a way of life. It's also been a welcome boost to an economy hit hard by industrial and manufacturing decline. Few understand the significance of football here better than the mayor.
I am an Everton fan, I'm the blue half of Liverpool. But I don't begrudge Liverpool the success. I actually believe they deserve it because they've played the best football. Now at the end of the day, I think it's going to give a real lift to the city.
It took 3 decades to rebuild enough to put Liverpool back on their perch. And with a renewed sense of belief and a manager who says he's here to stay, they'll be difficult to knock off again. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Liverpool.
Coming up next on Sky News tonight, we have a special report on how the pandemic has affected care homes and whether the most vulnerable people in our society were put to the back of the queue for hospital treatment. That's in a couple of minutes.
Taking a flight, your first in a while. At Qatar Airways, we've continued to fly, taking so many people home safely. Changing, adapting, perfecting, making us one of the world's most experienced airlines for passenger safety. So for your first flight into this new world, travel with an airline that has flown consistently throughout. Ready? Let's go further together. Qatar Airways.
start of the pandemic, there was a fear the NHS could be overwhelmed and 30,000 beds would be needed. Protect the NHS was the message from the government, but it wasn't until much later the true impact of COVID-19 on care homes was realised. Sky News has been reporting from inside care homes throughout the pandemic, looking at how the elderly have been treated during the crisis. And for some of the residents, their fate, it seemed, came down to one difficult decision. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has this special report, Coronavirus, Deciding Who Dies.
This is Muriel Woolley. She's got a chest infection and she's struggling to breathe. As each hour passes, the amount of oxygen in her blood is dropping to critical levels. But a doctor has decided that Muriel has reached the end of her life and will die right here in this room.
So this is my mum's care home, Roxburgh House. This was as close as I could get. She was breathless and she needed some kind of oxygen or something to try and make her feel better. At this point we knew she needed the hospital, she needed the help, but unfortunately she wasn't given that chance.
In the middle of a national health emergency, doctors have made decisions about who lives and who doesn't.
We all agreed that this lady needed help and it was completely denied.
Boris, if it was his mum, I'm sure that he'd want her to have oxygen.
In this pandemic, we look at whether the elderly were placed at the back of the queue when it came to receiving hospital treatment.
We rang quite a few times to get her a hospital admission and that was denied.
She had a right to be treated as an equal of any other human being in the country, and I don't think she was because of her age.
How do you go and tell someone of a sound mind that thinks they could be treated because they've just got a chest infection that they're going to die?
And what does this tell us about the decisions that doctors have to make?
As a society, we do value the lives of younger people more than older people, and I think across society, most people would feel that's right.
Should we be doing this? Is this right? Can we learn something? Is there any way that we can explain that?
So I think at the start of the pandemic, we were all very apprehensive. There was a very real concern that the NHS would be overwhelmed with the expectation that we'd see huge numbers of patients coming into hospital. We didn't do so well as a health and care system in how we planned with care homes.
There's one section of society that's admitted to hospitals more than any other, and that's people who live in care homes. Many have thought about what the end of their life might look like. How much treatment do they need? And should their heart stop, do they want to be brought back to life? These wishes can be put in writing. They're called DNA CPRs.
A DNA CPR order stands for Do Not Attempt Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation. So that means resuscitation by pressing hard on the chest, giving that person oxygen when available. And very frequently ribs are broken in that process. But I think as doctors we always have to think about what's the right thing for our patient. And that sometimes can be a difficult and nuanced decision.
In late March, early April, some health trusts and GP surgeries, out of the blue, start to ring relatives whose family members are in care homes to tell them should they need hospital treatment during the pandemic, they won't receive it.
Remember when Boris first said that, we're in a pandemic and that everybody's going to be affected and people are going to lose family members? And I got a cold shiver. I thought, oh, good grief, but didn't think I'd be affected so badly.
Tony Sweeney is 51 and has cerebral palsy. He's a big football fan and goes to the match at least once a week. In April, his sister Lisa found out a GP asked his care home to put a DNA on every resident, including him, should anyone get COVID-19.
I'm absolutely appalled. I think that's I think to put a DNR on everybody, on even old people is awful, but on my brother, who is very young at heart and he has a lot of life to live, I think is an absolute disgrace. When I found out that Home had said, that there was no way they were going to do a DNR on a 51-year-old and that there were other young people, I was really pleased about that. I thought, I'm glad that somebody's sticking up for them.
Lisa says it got worse. On a phone call with a GP, she was asked about a DNAR for her mum, Margaret Sweeney, a resident in the same care home as her son.
We were asking about whether, has your mum got a DNR? They're asking everybody about this for people in nursing homes. She also said that if she does have COVID and she needed oxygen, then she won't be able to have it. She said it'd be too much for her, it'd be uncomfortable. And that's when I said, well, I'd rather it be uncomfortable than dead.
And so with care being discussed in advance, it now appears that some elderly people are being manoeuvred away from hospitals to protect the NHS. In the West Midlands, Helen Keenan was about to have a similar conversation about her 84-year-old mum, Kathleen.
She met my dad when she was 16 and he was 18. They were a great pair because she was very feisty and fiery and he was very quiet and quite gentle. They had a good life,
On April the 3rd, an ambulance is called for Kathleen, who's struggling to breathe because of a chest infection.
Because of the whole COVID situation and her age, I spoke to the paramedics. Obviously he wasn't going to say anything official, but he just said, they're not necessarily admitting people that are representing like your mother.
Did you find that reasonable or unreasonable?
I thought it was totally unreasonable, and in the end they took her to hospital and we weren't allowed to go. And then we would get a phone call the next day from a doctor to give us more information. He said that there was a point scale, and I think if you got over 8 points you weren't viable.
This is called the Clinical Frailty Scale. The NHS uses it to rank patients' vulnerability from 1 to 9 in order to prioritise those most likely to recover from a treatment.
Basically, she didn't qualify for the bed, so she needed to go home. It made me feel like she'd just been written off as a human being, really.
Kathleen Keenan died a few days later. In April, news of blanket DNARs finds its way into the inbox of an MP.
Constituents contact me about a whole range of issues. It was a Friday evening and I received an email, and sometimes you really understand how distressed somebody is when they're sending it to you. Her mother, Vera Watt, was in a care home in Salford, and she had received a phone call from somebody at the hospital, somebody who was a speech and language therapist. And what she was basically saying was that she had some kind of directive or direction to contact the families of residents in care homes and talk through with them that they wouldn't be admitted to hospital if they had coronavirus. I was shocked, actually, because I've some experience of end-of-life planning and understand the issues in it. And it should be done by a clinician, it should be done by somebody's own GP, by somebody's hospital consultant. It shouldn't just be done casually in a phone call by somebody who doesn't have training to do it.
The Trust apologises to Vera Watt and her daughter for the way the call was handled. Salford NHS Trust told us that there's never been a policy to deny hospital admission to care or nursing home residents. A few weeks later, Vera, who is 79, falls ill again. The hospital admits her for treatment. She's treated and makes a full recovery.
I think it tells us two things, really. It tells us that the focus was entirely on the NHS and an acute sector and clearing people out from hospital and not admitting any more. We did get into a situation where a hospital was down to about 55-60% in Greater Manchester. So we didn't have an issue with whether people could be admitted to hospital. It was just a policy line that they would not be.
In mid-April, NHS England warns health trusts and GPs not to use blanket DNARs, calling them inappropriate. It isn't known how many families were contacted during this time.
My mum, Muriel Woolley, she was 73 years of age, but a very young 73 years of age. She music. She loved to ice skate when she was young. 3 years ago, we found her on the floor, and she'd had a bit of a fall. We got told it was sepsis.
Sepsis is a potentially life-threatening condition caused by the body's response to an infection. Muriel fought sepsis not once but twice in recent years. Muriel, though, has chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, which means she often struggles to breathe.
You're an absolute fighter, Mama.
Call me. In April, Muriel, or Mo to her friends, falls ill again, this time with a chest infection. She is very unwell at a time when the country is in the grip of a health crisis. The care manager at the care home calls 999. Mo's oxygen levels in her blood are below 50%, dangerously low. She's given oxygen by a paramedic and she responds well. But when her GP is called, it's decided that Mo will not go to hospital, but will end her life here.
The paramedics have then liaised over the telephone to a consultant sitting in a hospital who's never met the lady, who didn't even ask to do a video call with the lady, but his recommendation was she stay at Roxburgh House and she was to have a couple of hours to live, because ultimately the way her breathing was and the oxygen levels, she wouldn't live for a couple of hours. I was asked to go and tell Mo that she was going to end her life in the next couple of hours in Roxburgh House. Now that is the most heartbreaking thing I have ever been asked to do. I had to go in the room, I had to come out the room. 4 times it took me, because how do you go and tell someone of a sound mind that thinks they could be treated because they've just got a chest infection that they're going to die? And she said back to me, why me? Why me? And I couldn't answer her. I couldn't physically answer her.
A GP then video calls Mo to put in place a do not resuscitate order over the phone, explaining that she has just a few hours to live. Would you say that she was refused hospital treatment?
I would, yes, definitely so. Because I think at that time she knew that she was needing to go, and at that point I, thought the same. So to obviously get a phone call saying nothing's going to happen, I just wanted an answer at that point. I just wanted to know why. Why wasn't she taken to hospital? Why wasn't she going to get any other help?
Mo died in Roxburgh House care home 4 days later. The primary cause of death is a chest infection.
You want to go upstairs?
In part 2, we speak to the specialist nurses who say they were left fighting to get their elderly residents into hospital.
She was in pain and discomfort and breathless, etc. That didn't need to happen.
And how a relaxation in laws due to pandemic could stir up problems from the past.
It could put a number of people at risk, because the whole process of death investigation and death certification has been gone down because of the
nothing short but an amazing day today.
I wake up.
My name's Tony Nicholson. I'm a fitness coach and I'm an actor.
Thousands of people have died during this pandemic. In some cases, COVID is the known cause, but in others, it's not so clear. One big question is whether hospital treatment was denied to the elderly in order to protect the NHS.
Thumbs up today. Good. My name is Rachel Hind. I have owned Faversham House since 1999. I just want to talk a bit about the activities, what you're doing this afternoon. I am a trained nurse and worked in intensive care for many years. Okay. All right, thanks, Dawn. I shall see you later. I'm just going to see Johnny. Hello. Who wants to see you? There's only one Johnny Walsh. Are you alright? Our philosophy of care is to treat all our residents just with respect and dignity and help them enjoy the last few years of their life. So we have 20 service users.
This is a specialist nursing home. The nurses have decades of experience working here and in the NHS. But during the pandemic, they say it became increasingly difficult to get hospital treatment for residents. And I've come to find out why that is.
We had a lady who had all the signs and symptoms of a lower respiratory tract infection. She was unwell, she had fever. We wanted her to have a hospital admission, we wanted her to have IV antibiotics and we wanted her to have IV fluids. So we weren't allowed to send her into hospital. She was put on oral antibiotics here and we were denied the COVID testing. We asked for oxygen and we were denied it.
It was a shock. All the nurses that day, we all agreed that this lady needed immediate help and it was completely denied.
So this lady was flatly denied medical treatment and you say there's no excuse for it?
Yes, there's no excuse.
Saying it, we just felt like we were just left and pushed to one side. Yeah. That day, I felt like a second-class citizen. It was horrible.
It sounds like she might have suffered needlessly.
She did suffer.
No, she was let down, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And now she's passed away.
Yeah, she's passed away since.
And my question is that in a pandemic, when hospitals are busy, is that a justification?
No, not whatsoever. Not whatsoever. She was still happily living her life in her own little way, wasn't she?
Yeah, yeah.
So why should she be denied that?
It's just unethical.
Care homes and the NHS begin to drift further and further apart. And care homes are asked not only to care for residents in-house, but take on a major role normally carried out by a visiting GP, the recording of deaths. At the time, the government was building temporary morgues, fearing a sudden rise in deaths. Any delays in recording them could see places like this begin to fill up. The Coronavirus Act, given royal assent at the beginning of the pandemic, relaxes the rules about how deaths are verified and certified in care homes to make sure there are no delays in processing the dead. The Department of Health and Social Care said the changes to death certification had allowed public services to manage during the pandemic while allowing funerals to take place.
Dr. Harold Frederick Shipman, driven away to Strangeways prison tonight, knows he will now spend the rest of his days behind bars.
But could there be a more worrying, unintended consequence to these changes? Some of these safeguards were introduced following the conviction of Dr. Harold Shipman, who murdered more than 200 elderly patients in his care. Shipman was able to get away with it because of weaknesses in the way deaths were certified. And so during the crisis, GPs are advised to avoid entering care homes, primarily to stop the spread of COVID-19. But at the same time, crucially, the law now allows care homes to nominate a competent member of staff who can now verify the deaths of elderly residents in the absence of a doctor. A doctor, therefore, doesn't need to be there. We've seen evidence that care providers were deeply concerned by this. Here's an email between one care home owner and a local NHS official talking about verification of death, or VOD for short.
I think it is a tall task of homes right now to assess competency for VOD when majority of homes are fighting COVID. If you are expecting us to verify death during this time, it should not fall back to individual care homes. We need protecting. We're all nervous, under pressure and scared.
So some care homes are left struggling to get hospital treatment for their elderly residents, whilst at the same time shouldering greater responsibility for making sure that deaths are recorded properly. With difficult decisions being made about who receives care and who doesn't, I want to know where the law stands when it comes to some of the stories I've heard from relatives of elderly residents.
I'm Emma Jones. I'm a partner in the Human Rights Department at Lee Day. My area of specialism is in human rights and also in treatment and care of older people in care homes, hospitals, whether or not their treatment is different to treatment that a younger person would receive. I do understand that it's a very, very difficult time for doctors, nurses, healthcare providers, and these sorts of things had to be thought about. But to put out a directive or a blanket policy, I would question whether or not that such a decision would be lawful. You see people being discharged from hospitals into care homes with COVID. Is that because the hospital doesn't want COVID spreading in the wards, but it's okay for it to spread through a care home? And then we would ask, well, why is that? What is the demographic of individuals in a care home? Probably older.
And with care homes closed to visitors, staff verifying deaths, and fewer doctors to oversee events, care homes could be seen as less regulated now than they were before the pandemic.
It could put a number of people at risk because the whole process of death investigation and death certification has been dumbed down because of the pandemic. But it seems to me that we are now in a position where there isn't an investigation, or there doesn't need to be an investigation, and deaths potentially are being accurately recorded. So are we back in a time as it was pre-doc shipment?
The Department for Health and Social Care says that treatment for any individual should be based on an informed discussion between a patient and their treating clinician. But that's not been the experience for some of the people we've spoken to. Is it right for a doctor to tell someone that they're going to die over FaceTime?
No. That doctor should have come to this care home. That doctor should have used PPE, whether it be a gown, whether it be a suit, whether it be goggles, whether it be visors. We've got the facilities here. Why couldn't they come in and say to this lady, did they not deserve that bit of dignity, that little bit of respect?
Do you think it's fair to say that within a pandemic, it was always going to be that the elderly were not going to receive as much treatment as the younger demographics?
So as a society, we do value the lives of younger people more than older people, and I think across society, most people would feel that that's right.
Is it fair to say that because of that, the system was stacked against the elderly?
The system was certainly stacked against older people in care homes.
How do you feel about these big decisions being made with a GP and a patient over FaceTime in a care home in a pandemic?
That's obviously very suboptimal in terms of what we would all want as a way of making these decisions. But in a pandemic, there may not be an alternative.
So can lessons be learned in case the virus returns?
We really do need a public inquiry to be looking into these issues to explore whether or not there have been mistakes and failings.
And are things any better now than at the beginning of the pandemic?
Are you still feeling the pressure not to admit to a hospital today?
Yes, I think so. I don't think anything's changed massively. We will not allow people to be ignored just because they live in a care home setting.
You presume that because she's old, because she's got COVID, then she's a goner. And after a couple of days, she perked up and she was great.
If you look at just this one case of Vera, with antibiotics and oxygen, she came back to the care home and recovered. So, how many more people were in that situation?
And can people ever come to terms with losing a loved one like this? This is the first time that you've been back since she died. I mean, how does it feel to be back at this window?
It's awful. It's awful being here and knowing that she's there. It's very, very hard. And knowing this was the last time that I've seen her. Love you millions.
Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin with that investigation, coronavirus deciding who dies. Coming up on this special edition of Sky News tonight, I'll be joined by a panel of guests to talk about the crisis in care homes, which has been highlighted by the virus pandemic. Welcome back. We're going to spend the next half an hour or so discussing the important issues raised in that special report from our People and Politics correspondent, Nick Martin. Coronavirus deciding who dies. Well, let's bring in our panel. Carolina Bilic, a care worker and Executive Director of the Care Workers Charity. Robert Kilgore, Chief Executive of Renaissance Care, which runs more than 20 care homes. Mike Padgham, Chair of the Independent Care Group, which represents care providers in Yorkshire. And Dr. Cathy Gardner, a councillor at East Devon District Council. Her father is one of thousands of vulnerable people who tragically died in a care home during the pandemic. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this evening. It is much appreciated. Dr. Cathy Gardner, perhaps we can come to you first. It was such a distressing film to watch, wasn't it? Especially, I imagine, given your own personal circumstances and experience. What was your reaction to what you saw?
Yes, it's always distressing to see other bereaved relatives and care home staff too talking about what's happened and is still happening in care homes, and to see the poor lady outside the window just echoes my experiences with my father.
Tell me what happened to your dad.
My father died in a care home in Oxfordshire of probable COVID-19, April the 3rd, in fact. I was repeatedly by home to say that he was ill. He was never tested, so you don't know whether he had COVID or not. The symptoms match. I was able to travel up to him about 24 hours before he died. Through the window, it was dark. But fortunately for me, many bereaved people haven't been able to, and I'm really so aware of stories that it's just heartbreaking what's happened.
Really heartbreaking. Robert Kilgore, perhaps we can come to you next. You run care homes. Did you hear at the height of the pandemic cases where families and carers were told residents couldn't get the hospital treatment that they needed?
Yes, I have heard of that happening, but certainly our experience at Renaissance Care, and just to correct you slightly there, we run 15 care homes in Scotland, not 20. But and I must pay tribute to the amazing work and dedication of all of our 1,100 staff that have been absolutely fantastic working around the clock in the front line against this horrible virus. But certainly we have not experienced it. On a few occasions, I admit, we have had to fight quite hard with the families and the GP to get hospital admissions, but generally we have been able to get hospital admissions when we've needed them, and we've had 91 residents recover following a positive test of COVID-19, and several of those have been following admission to hospital and recovery and then returning to the care home. But the vast majority, frankly, have stayed in the care home, and through the excellent nursing and care of our care staff, have recovered.
Well, that's excellent to hear. Mike Padgham, what about your experience? You represent care providers. Is it your belief the elderly in need of hospital treatment were at times put to the back of the queue?
Well, first of all, could I just extend my condolences to Cathy Gardner and all those people who lost loved ones anywhere in the pandemic, whether it's in a care home or not. But yes, I do represent care homes. I also have care homes myself. So my experience has been similar to Robert says. I've heard of many cases where people perhaps have been denied hospital treatment. I haven't experienced that myself. Unless in one case we had a bit of struggle to get someone admitted, but we did succeed in the end. But I do think, as was mentioned in the piece, I do think as a society we need to value older people more than we currently have done in the past.
Yeah, we'll discuss that certainly in more depth a little later on, but I just want to turn to Carolina. The pressure on care workers during the height of the pandemic clearly is immense, isn't it? What was your experience of this blanket use of DNARs, the do not attempt resuscitation forms that we heard about in Nick's film?
So I've had conversations with care providers around the country who received very stressing letters at one point a few weeks ago around blanket DNRs, and that was both for care homes for elderly and also for supported living for people with learning disabilities. All of these people really fought very hard to make sure that that wasn't put in place, because that needs to be assessed on an individual basis. And all of the care workers and managers and providers found it very distressing that was even being considered. I think throughout the crisis, care workers have yet again shown with amazing work they do and how far they'd go with personal sacrifice to make sure that people get the best care that they can possibly deliver.
Yeah, Mike, just going back to what you were saying earlier, we do need to give our elderly dignity and respect. Do you think that really was thrown out of the window at the peak of this pandemic?
I've been involved in social care in England for perhaps near on 30 years. And I do think in all those 3 decades, social care, and particularly older people, has always been further down the list of many other priorities. And I do think that the pandemic brought it to the forefront, really. I just hope one thing that we might learn from this, to actually never let it happen again, is that we've got to reform social care once and for all, instead of keep talking about what we might do.
Yeah, and Kathy, something else that was very distressing in the report was when we heard of residents being given consultations over the phone or in a video call rather than face-to-face. At the end of someone's life, the least they expect is to have a face-to-face conversation. As a doctor yourself, you must have found that distressing.
Yes, I'm a scientist by training with a PhD, but yes, I know that my father's GP was viewing the patients in his care home by video call. Although I have to say, when I spoke to her after my father died, she was really wonderful and really helpful and really supportive. So I don't criticise the care, but I think the biggest sort of cause of pain for me and so many others that I've been in contact with is the fact that we were distant from our relatives at the end of their life, and for them not to have the doctor there talking to them, not to have relatives there. The care staff, in my father's case certainly, were very, very good, and they really did look after him very well. But it's just not the same, and I think the distance obviously is difficult, and with PPE as well, it just gives that person, they feel like they're not being treated in a caring way that they would have been normally. So just overall, really not a good way to spend your last days.
Not at all. And Robert Kilgour, let's move on to this area of verifying and certifying deaths in care. We know that the Coronavirus Act relaxed the rules. Was that the right thing to do, do you think, given the circumstances?
Well, I'm not medically, although like Mike, I've been involved in the care sector for 30 years. I wouldn't be able to medically comment on that. Certainly, our staff who look after our residents and consider them to be very much their second families, they did worry, as I did worry, that they were being treated as second-class citizens very much, and that it was NHS first and social care very much as an afterthought, and that was something which upset everyone involved, whether staff, relatives, and in fact the residents themselves. But we have to, at time of death, in Scotland, we have to inform within 24 hours on a special form to the care inspector of, in our view, from the care home, what the cause of death was. And I'm sure we don't see the death certificate that the GP provides. Certainly GPs did come into our care homes in PPE during the worst of the pandemic, but certainly it wasn't something that we get involved in the death certificate side. But we do provide this form at point of death for a death of a service client to the Care Inspectorate, and that's something we're asked an opinion on, but it's not, obviously, the GP may take it into consideration, but it's not something that we see, the death certificate is not something that we see.
Okay, well, same question really to Carolina. With regard to the verification and certification of death, I mean, it's putting quite a lot of pressure, isn't it, on carers and care home staff if they're expected to be doing that?
Yes, a lot of extra pressure and a lot of extra duties were put and are still being put on care workers in all settings in social care because of COVID-19. And that's while care workers are still being recognised as highly skilled, for example, in the immigration policy. That's been causing a lot of mental health issues, a lot of distress to care workers, seeing a lot of people that they're working with that they weren't expecting, let's say, to pass away, die because of the virus, and having to deal with at times multiple deaths. I think one of the most important things that we need to learn from all of this is that you cannot just put all of your efforts into the NHS, because the NHS cannot function well without social care. And because that was really what was done, we ended up with so many deaths in care homes. So it's finally the time for social care and health to have the same parity of esteem and effort and funding to go into it. So if we ever come across, and hopefully not the crisis like this, the same mistakes won't be made.
Yeah, I can see you all nodding your heads, understandably in agreement there. Mike, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on what the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, said. He claimed, didn't he, that he was putting a protective ring around care homes. When you heard him say that, what went through your mind?
Well, it didn't feel like that hit the sharp end, to be honest. I think it was a little bit too late. So I'd like to, talk to him directly and ask him how he thought that was happening, because I do think we were forgotten at the beginning. But I make the point again, in fact, that we've been forgotten for many, many years. It's not just in a pandemic. This was just the culmination of that. And no, I think he paid tribute to the care home and social care workers, and he wore the social care badge that I've got on this evening. But after that, it's gone back to the NHS. I just think it was another tick in the box, really. I do hope that the government does change view on social care in the future, but it didn't feel like we're being protected at all. And I just hope that he's there to help us in the future in England and in Scotland, that their Secretary of State's there also help care homes in that part of the country.
Cathy, do you think the government understands the gravity of the situation, the seriousness of what went wrong?
That's a very, very good question. My intention, through my call for a judicial review, which is being fantastically supported through crowdfunding by over 2,500 people, a lot of whom have lost people in care homes, is to really make the government focus on what they did and the legality of the decision making behind their discharge guidance, in particular, discharging patients from the NHS quickly to free up beds, and basically throwing care home residents under a bus. It seems that the virus was seeded into care homes because those patients were discharged, many without testing. Of course, even testing isn't necessarily reliable, because just recently there's been a case in a care home in Desborough where patients were discharged from hospital. They tested negative, but subsequently went on to develop coronavirus and infect other people in care homes. So I think the government is taking notice of this, because they've had to respond to my call for a judicial review already. And if we get permission to go to court, then they will have to answer, and we will seek the answers to the questions that have been asked about why did they say there was a protective ring from the beginning when there is no evidence to support that. We've asked for that, and we're asking for quite a lot of other things as well as part of that case.
The government did turn down our invitation to be on the panel tonight, but they did give us a statement. They said it is unacceptable for advanced care plans, including do not attempt resuscitation orders, to be applied in a blanket fashion to any group of people. NHS England has made this clear to the Health Service and Care Quality Commission and has been urgently contacting providers where this practice has been brought to their attention. Do stay with us. Thank you very much for the moment. Time for a break. Coming up, and my panel will be sticking around to talk about the lessons we can learn from the current crisis and how we can change the current system going forward. Don't go away. discussing what has happened in our care homes during the pandemic. Our panel is still with us. Carolina Gerlich, Robert Kilgore, Mike Padgham and Dr. Kathy Gardner. Good to see you all again. Carolina, perhaps I can turn to you first. We've touched on this already, but it'd be good to get your thoughts on what lessons we can learn from all of this moving forward.
I think first of all, from the point of view of our charity, is that care workers need to be better rewarded for the amazing work that they do. And, this needs to be looking at a full reform of social care, pay that care workers receive, respect and recognition and professionalisation around in the sector. I think the public really needs to understand what an important role social care plays in the society, and that care workers deserve to be rallied behind the same way the NHS does, and that care workers really need people to show them the appreciation to be able to do what they're doing. And like I mentioned before, parity of esteem between social care and health. We cannot really have another situation where health side is prioritised so much that we're seeing really severe consequences in social care.
Robert Kilgore, some will say that the real problem is in the care system itself. In Scotland, more than half of care homes are run for profit, and I noted today, head of Unison for Scotland said the care home system we have is complicated, fractured, and largely driven by the profit motive. What did you make of those comments?
I didn't see those comments, but I've heard comments similar being made. It's worth pointing out, certainly in Scotland, that 15% of care homes in Scotland are run by local councils at a vastly increased cost per resident per week than the independent or voluntary sector provide an excellent service, an equal service for a much lesser cost to the taxpayer. And I'm all for, and GMB called for it as well as Unison, I'm all for a full review of social care in Scotland, and in fact in the UK for too long social care has been a Cinderella service, and that has to end. If there is something small and positive to come out of this terrible situation we're just coming out of, it has to be the real reform of social care and put on a parity with the NHS. But it has to be a full reform, not a kangaroo court to beat up the independent sector. It must look at local authority-run care homes, independently run, voluntary-run, NHS-run care homes. It has to look across the board in Scotland and also in England, because health and social care is fully devolved in the UK, so the Scottish Government has full responsibility for funding and the running of health and social care in Scotland. But Scottish Government have said they intend to do that, and I welcome that and would support it.
Yeah, I mean, same question really to Mike Padgham. And we've just heard how fragmented social care is in the UK. Is that part of the problem, do you think, or is it too simplistic to say that?
No, I think it's been fragmented for far too long, and I go back to my points earlier about reform. Reform is long overdue. I can speak really in England. What's happened there is we've had, in the last 20 years, 12 ministers, 13 documents and 17 different reviews on how social care should be structured. And I think part of the problem is the NHS is run nationally, social care in England, around 150 local authorities. That's why it's disjointed. And we've talked so much about integration in the past. I think the time going forward is to bring the two parts together, equal attention given to the NHS and social care, and to fund social care as well as the NHS is, because local authorities in England have had their budgets cut by $8 billion since 2010, and they can't provide the purchase of care they require. The governments of all colours, Labour, the Coalition and the Conservatives, have all got it wrong on social care in the past.
Yeah, you make some very interesting points. Dr. Kathy Gardner, I just want to put to you something that Nick mentioned in his report. It was a question that he posed. Is there any justification, do you think, to say at the height of the pandemic, when there were fears at one stage maybe 500,000 people could lose their lives, that was the warning, right or wrong, that we have to prioritise the young over the elderly? It's a terrible thing to have to say out loud, but it is a question that's been posed, isn't it?
It is, but I think that's an appalling way to look at it. It might sound fine if it's not your relative that then dies. I think we have to consider that we've had over 25,000 excess deaths in care homes. That is absolutely appalling. And a lot of that is down to decision making by government, and that's what my judicial review is looking into. And especially also relating to that statement made by Matt Hancock that they put a protective ring around care homes from the start, when they absolutely did not. They did put a lot of effort into protecting or calling for those over 70, the vulnerable, to stay in their own homes. But for those who were unlucky enough to already be in care homes, they had infected people moved in with them. So those things did not sit side by side. But I'd also like to comment on your point about putting things right for the future, because my case is certainly not about money. We're not seeking financial compensation. We want admission of wrongdoing, but we also, very importantly, want to make sure that steps are put in place to make sure that care home residents are better protected in the future, because I don't believe they're protected today. I'm not convinced that things are being done properly today. It's perfectly possible to isolate people in care homes. If you can get people to isolate and keep safe at home, you can do it in a bigger home, but you can't do it by discharging people from hospitals to care homes without any consideration of the consequences, and I want the government to answer for that.
And Carolina, just finally, you mentioned before the hard work that people do in our care sector, and of course we're hugely grateful for that work. How are things now on the front line? Have things eased since the peak of the pandemic? Do you get the sense that the government is taking more interest now, is taking more care for our carers?
So, to be perfectly honest, we are getting more testing, and PPE provision is better than what it was a few weeks ago. But I have to say, in terms of mental health of care workers, things aren't great. Many of them have made sacrifices not to see their families for 2 or 3 months, and it's just now that they're able to do that, so that's a very long time to be isolated from their families. And a lot of them have suffered financial consequences because of this. They've made the choice to support people that they work with and self-isolate, where it was suspected they may have COVID because testing wasn't in place. And with the way the sector works, many of them were only on statutory sick pay or on no pay at all. And we as a charity have set up a fund, and we are trying to support care workers with grants around that financial hardship. But I think the most important thing right now for care workers is for people to understand that a care worker is not just the person that you look down upon and think, oh, they're just bomb wipers. You really need to appreciate the hard work, the emotional investment and the personal sacrifice that care workers make every day. And this is in a pandemic or without a pandemic. They're always doing their best.
Yeah, we of course agree with you. Carolina Gerlich, Executive Director of the Care Workers Charity, Robert Kilgore, Chief Executive of Renaissance Care, Mike Padgham, Chair of the Independent Care Group, and Dr. Kathy Gardner, whose father tragically died during this pandemic. Thank you all very much indeed for your contribution. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Coming up next on Sky News, all the latest from Glasgow.
first in a while. At Qatar Airways, we've continued to fly, taking so many people home safely. Changing, adapting, perfecting, making us one of the world's most experienced airlines for passenger safety. So, for your first flight into this new world, travel with an airline that has flown consistently throughout. Ready? Let's go further together. Qatar Airways.
In a knife attack in Glasgow, a police officer who rushed to the scene is in a serious condition in hospital. The attack is declared a major incident, but is not being treated as terrorism. The perpetrator has been shot dead by police.
I mean, this is what you dread as a police officer going into a scene like this, and again, it's something which police officers have to do. We have to walk into danger.
I'm at the scene at West George Street in Glasgow at 10 to 1 today. A man wielding a knife inflicted stab wounds on 6 people inside the Park Inn Hotel. Eyewitnesses speak of a blood-strewn elevator. Tonight 6 people are in hospital. They include a 42-year-old police officer.
Also tonight, don't take liberties with lockdown. Boris Johnson warns people not to ignore social distancing guidelines. NHS England apologises after a Sky News investigation reveals that less than a quarter of NHS trusts have carried out a risk assessment for Black and Asian staff. Tens of thousands of jobs at risk after the owner of some of Britain's biggest shopping centres collapses into administration. And Liverpool pays tribute to Jurgen Klopp after he leads his team to its first Premier League title for 30 years. Hello, good evening. A police officer is in a critical condition tonight after he was stabbed at a hotel in Glasgow city centre. He's one of 6 men who were injured in the attack. The youngest was just 17, and all are now receiving treatment in hospital. The perpetrator was shot dead at the scene by armed officers. The incident is not being treated as terrorism, but Boris Johnson and Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon have both thanked police for their bravery. Well, James Matthews joins us now live from Glasgow. James.
Many thanks, Anna. Yes, officers still at the scene tonight. Investigations have continued throughout the afternoon and into the evening.
It may remain a mystery why this happened, but exactly what took place here in the centre of Glasgow was shockingly clear to all those in the vicinity. There were many eyewitnesses in this relatively busy street in the centre of Scotland's biggest city. Many saw what happened outside and heard shots. The perpetrator was shot dead inside. The story began at 10 to 1 when there were shouts heard and people were heard to scream from the reception area of the Park Inn Hotel. Friday lunchtime in the centre of Glasgow. This was a chaotic, harrowing scene. Armed police officers rushed to the Park Inn. Inside the hotel they shot a man dead, but not before a number of people had been stabbed. Witnesses heard at least one shot fired and spoke of a blood-strewn scene.
When I went down the lift it was covered with blood. So I did not take the lift and I went down to the stairs. When I went down to the stairs, that's where I saw the whole reception area was covered with blood. So what happened was I saw that one of the reception got stabbed and he was lying behind the desk of the reception, behind the receptionist's desk. He was lying and he was gasping for air.
Witnesses spoke of stab victims inside and outside the building. Paramedics in protective suits treated casualties on the pavement.
We kind of just heard everything and looked out the window and within a few minutes went downstairs to see what was actually happening. I could see someone lying on a curb, but I wasn't sure whether they'd been hit with a brake or something like that. And then we saw them on the steps. They were bleeding from the torso and unfortunately lost their life.
Police said the 6 people injured included a 42-year-old male police officer, taken to hospital with stab wounds and in a critical condition. As armed officers left the scene, Police Scotland ruled out terrorism as a factor and issued a statement on events inside the Park Inn and those involved.
Officers were on the scene within 2 minutes and armed officers shortly afterwards, and the incident was quickly contained. A man was shot by armed police and has subsequently died. 6 other men are in hospital for treatment, including a 42-year-old police officer who is in a critical but stable condition.
The Park Inn is one of a number of hotels in this city used to house asylum seekers and refugees since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Campaigners on their behalf have long complained that they have been living in intolerable conditions, which were having a significant impact on their mental health.
This has been a dreadful afternoon for the City of Glasgow, particularly for those who have been directly involved. Those injured, obviously, but there will have been people who witnessed this afternoon, particularly in the location of this incident, quite horrific events. And I think I will not be alone across Scotland tonight thinking of everybody who has in any way been affected by what unfolded.
Investigations into what happened here will continue long after the scene here has cleared. Those inquiries are for the longer term. The more immediate concern is coming to terms with the carnage that unfolded on this city centre street. It was a shocking spectacle, and I was struck, Anna, by the eyewitnesses who we spoke to today. They genuinely seemed shaken by what they had witnessed at close quarters, some in tears indeed. There were people inside the building, there were people outside the building as well. One eyewitness said that he'd seen an individual who had ran, apparently trying to flee the Park Inn Hotel. He had what appeared to be a stab wound, and he was being treated by a passerby. That scene was repeated on the steps outside of the hotel, and of course we haven't seen what took place inside the building, but that will be the subject clearly of a number of investigations, principally what's going on behind me at the moment. Forensic officers have been coming in and out all through the evening. There will be an inquiry by Scotland's police watchdog, as is the routine when shots are fired on a job. Tonight, 6 people remain in hospital. That 42-year-old officer, not yet named by Police Scotland, we expect that to change fairly shortly for him to be identified, but he's said to be in a critical but stable condition. We may never know why this happened. Everyone's clear about what happened, obviously, but In terms of what made one individual stab 6 others inside a hotel, we don't know yet. Terrorism has clearly been ruled out. Perhaps now the discussion moved towards circumstances that the residents of that hotel found themselves in. Glasgow's hotels have been home to asylum seekers over the course of the coronavirus pandemic. They were decanted into hotels and guest houses, and campaigners on their behalf have long complained about the conditions that they were being kept in. Unable to socially distance, being denied medical treatment, having poor Wi-Fi, and so not able to contact relatives back home. Those same campaigners say this had a significant impact on the mental health of the people inside those various hotels, and in some cases was driving them to the edge. So perhaps that's where the discussion, the analysis, the investigation lies in terms of why this happened, but in terms of what happened, people who were nearby are very clear about that and struggling actually in some cases to come to terms with it.
James, thank you. The owner of some of the UK's biggest shopping centres has collapsed into administration, putting more than 100,000 jobs at risk. Into, which runs the Trafford Centre in Manchester, Gateshead's Metro Centre and Braehead just outside Glasgow has been struggling with debts of more than £4 billion. Catherine Vitozzi reports from Manchester on the shopping centres at risk of closure.
This is what you see when you arrive at the Trafford Shopping Centre. Its classical features suggest strength, power and permanence. But today, Into, the company that owns it, went into administration, the biggest corporate casualty so far of the COVID-19 lockdown. Into is Britain's biggest shopping mall owner, with 17 centres in total. 2,500 people are employed by the company directly. 30,000 are involved in the company's supply chains, and 100,000 work in their tenants' stores, making it a significant regional employer and now a significant regional problem.
The Trafford Centre is a destination of national significance, so of course any interruption to business is economically damaging. And we would also be working very hard to support both those who run the Trafford Centre and the businesses who operate within it.
But the shopping centre's mainly young retail workforce don't want reassurances, they want jobs.
I love working in the Trafford Centre. Like, I've worked here for about 1.5 years and it's just such a nice place to work, always full of like so many people, but kind of be sad if we lost our job as well, because just all my friends and everything, but the best really.
We've been open for 2 weeks now, and to be told that, oh yeah, we might be closing down again, it's just kind of, you just don't know what's going on. You don't know if you're just like dipping out all the time or what's going to happen.
During lockdown, some really well-known high street shops closed, but there was nothing to match the size and the scale of the Into shopping centres, and its closure would be the starkest warning yet of the problems to come for the retail sector. Into, like other retail players, had been struggling for years, burdened first by debt and then the lockdown slowdown.
It's going to be an extremely complex administration. If you think about what Into does, it keeps these shopping centres open, it provides the services, the lighting, the cleaning, etc. So the suggestion is there's going to need to be about £12 billion put on the table just to keep these shopping centres alive.
For now, Into says its shopping centres will remain open. Its prime retail space could be tempting for new buyers, but in this post-COVID climate, that's far from certain. Caterina Vitozzi, Sky News in Greater Manchester.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned that people are taking too many liberties as the UK comes out of lockdown. He said the government would not be closing beaches, but ministers are concerned that if people fail to observe social distancing, there could be a new spike in coronavirus cases. Ashna Hurina has more now on how some people are breaking lockdown.
Oh wow, we having so much fun! Oh my gosh, what was that? What was that?
Scenes that threaten a virus resurgence.
Oh my god.
In Notting Hill, a street party of hundreds turns ugly as the crowd attacks officers, breaking up their illegal fun.
It's hot. Some people have drunk far too much. Some people are just angry and aggressive, and some people are plain violent. We will be prepared this weekend. We have officers all over London working hard again to try to keep the peace.
Social gatherings like these threaten the reopening of the hospitality sector next week. The Prime Minister, who, when easing restrictions, said he trusted the British people to use their common sense, today slammed those flouting the rules.
People taking too many liberties with the guidance, mingling too much, not observing social distance. So some parts of the world, I won't name them, but you've got spikes, really serious spikes in the incidence of the disease.
Advice now heeded by sun seekers in Bournemouth, keeping their distance. Despite 24 hours ago, the beach looking like this.
If it gets too busy here today, we're going to go.
We've been here since 9 o'clock this morning. There was no one here.
Sort of figured the weather was getting a bit better, well, a bit cooler. Wouldn't be as crazy with all the stuff going on yesterday. Thought it'd be a bit more safe to come down, so come down today.
It's these beauty spots which are likely to suffer the most, as extra visitors mean added pressure for local hospitals.
Yesterday, we had patients who couldn't get to the hospital to have a swab before they could come in for their elective procedure because of the traffic on our road, and it just makes me really sad.
The government hasn't ruled out regional lockdowns if infections spike. In Wales, though, the First Minister said packed beaches like this, which did descend into disorder, threaten the easing of lockdown completely.
This is how it is now.
As COVID-19 deaths clamber past 42,000, the relaxing of lockdown has to be gentle. But a tug of war is raging as the government tries to tame weeks of pent-up public frustration and keep us safe. Asha Haranak, Sky News.
NHS England has apologised after an investigation by Sky News revealed that less than a quarter of NHS trusts had carried out a risk assessment for Black and Asian staff. Two separate reports have suggested that people from ethnic minorities are more at risk of dying from COVID-19 than white people. And this is particularly true for carers on the front line of the fight against the virus. Imzan Rashid reports on NHS risk assessments.
It was meant to be a great leveller, infecting a prince to hospital porters, but COVID-19 is killing one group disproportionately in our community and within our health service. Sky News analysis found that 75% of all healthcare staff that have died from COVID-19 are from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic background. Stark numbers like this led NHS England to advise all trusts to risk assess their BAME staff at the end of April.
All we've lived and breathed for the past 3-4 months has been COVID. But
2 months on from that instruction, NHS staff like this consultant and many of his colleagues have still not been formally risk assessed.
To be honest with you, I'm absolutely fuming. And I suspect that a lot of my colleagues will be absolutely furious as well. This is an institutionally racist organisation, and certain groups of people are not prioritised, and they're treated the same. If this was an illness that affected preferentially Caucasians, it would be a very different story.
In fact, Sky News can reveal that many vulnerable non-white NHS staff right across the country have still not been risk assessed despite guidance from the very top. We contacted 221 NHS trusts in England to find out if they've risk assessed all of their BAME staff as recommended. 149 of those trusts came back to us, but from that group, only 23% said they had risk assessed all of their BAME staff. But one former hospital CEO says the task is too big and could lead to huge logistical issues.
I don't know a CEO of a trust who does not take this seriously and does not want to do it. But because of the numbers involved and the complexity of doing it, it's a mammoth task and it will take time.
Just this week, in a letter, NHS bosses urged trusts to complete risk assessments within a month. And today, the Chief People Officer apologised to those who haven't been assessed.
the FOI results are disappointing. So let's be clear that this is protecting our staff is the number one priority of the NHS. It's the number one priority of any employer, because there's not only a legal requirement to provide health and safety at work, there's also the moral requirement to do that.
We are expecting a second wave of COVID-19, and questions remain whether some of the most vulnerable people tasked with protecting our lives will be fully assessed to protect theirs. Inzamam Rashid, Sky News.
A teenager who threw a 6-year-old boy from the viewing gallery at the Tate Modern has been jailed for at least 15 years. The boy's parents spoke after the sentencing about the horror and pain felt by their family and how hard it was to explain what had happened to their son. Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports.
Mentally ill and violent, Jonty Bravery told his carers he wanted to hurt or kill someone. Alone and unsupervised at the Tate Modern Art Gallery, he carried out his threat. He grabbed a 6-year-old boy, threw him 100 feet from a viewing gantry, and almost killed him. Witnesses said he shrugged and laughed at what he'd just done. He told the boy's father, "Yes, I am mad." After seeing the attacker jailed, a detective read a statement from the young boy's family.
The acts committed by this individual against our son is unspeakable. Words cannot express the horror and the fear that his actions have brought upon us and our son, who is now wondering why he's in hospital. How can one explain to a child that someone deliberately tried to kill him? From what the doctor said, he has many years of physiotherapy ahead of him, and we have no prospects or plan for the future other than being by his side.
The boy on holiday from France suffered multiple fractures and a bleed on his brain.
He is still in a wheelchair today, wears splints on his left arm and both his legs, and spends his days in a corset moulded to his waist, sat in his wheelchair. The nights are always extremely difficult. His sleep is very agitated. He is in pain. He wakes up many times and he cries.
Jonty Bravery has autism spectrum disorder, a behavioural condition, but the judge said that did not explain his attack on the boy. Mrs. Justice McGowan told him the fear he must have experienced and the horror his parents felt are beyond imagination. You had intended to kill someone that day. You almost killed that 6-year-old boy. You'll spend the greater part, if not all, of your life detained. You may never be released. Social services had been supervising the teenager since he was a juvenile. He was in supported accommodation but allowed out alone for 4 hours at a time. The council said the case was being reviewed and it would learn from the findings. Jonty Bravery is being treated at Broadmoor Secure Hospital. His parents said they could never forgive him, but felt they had been let down by the system. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, what next for Liverpool fans and Jurgen Klopp's history-making team?
amazing day today.
I wake up, sleep, eat, wake up, sleep, eat.
My name's Tony Nicholson. I'm a fitness coach and I'm an actor.
You want some coffee? No. You want some coffee? No.
That's coming up next on Sky News. Well, now for the story behind the headline. I'm Dermot Manahan and I'm the new host of the Sky News Daily Podcast, bringing you news and in-depth analysis from our team of specialists. I'll be joined by our experts to delve into the stories that matter to you. Trusted news with no agenda. The Sky News Daily Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Liverpool's most famous manager, Bill Shankly, famously said that he wanted to bring happiness to the people of Liverpool. Well, tonight, the red half of Merseyside is bursting with joy because, after 30 years, Anfield is once again home to the champions of England. And the man who's brought this latest success says there's more to come, as our sports correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
This is what the party looks like when you've won the Premier League for the first time. The celebrations at the Liverpool Hotel went on until almost breakfast time. The manager Jurgen Klopp showing his dancing feet not quite as sharp as his football brain, but he was surprisingly fresh-faced the next morning. First of all, congratulations, Jurgen. Speaking to the people of Liverpool, they seem to have a fondness for you that goes beyond football. Do you feel that closeness, and can you explain why that is?
I feel very close to the city, even when I cannot go in the city. I love the way they see the life. I love the way they want to be different, are different, but are very special in a very good way. And we both come from a region where they speak a pretty strong and strange dialect. So where I'm coming from, nobody understands the world outside that, and that's with Scouse pretty similar.
You arrived in Merseyside 4.5 years ago, a hot property in football management, but without the ego of others.
I'm a totally normal guy. I'm the normal one, maybe, if you want this.
It's proved a perfect match. The 53-year-old from Germany's Black Forest, taking Liverpool from 10th in the league to the title. He also shares their socialist principles and values. What about Jurgen Klopp?
Oh, he's just a fantastic, amazing human being. He is now immortal in this city.
He's part of the furniture now. He's an adopted Scouser now, you know what I mean? So everyone loves him.
I love that man. I have the same bait. I even emailed him and he hasn't answered me. I'm gutted we put that up. Jurgen, answer me, please.
It's significantly quieter at Anfield than it was on Thursday night. People have been understandably criticised for gathering here in their hundreds when lockdown is still on. What's also understandable, though, is that physical feeling of excitement. Football's not just a game here, it's a way of life. It's also been a welcome boost to an economy hit hard by industrial and manufacturing decline. Few understand the significance of football here better than the mayor.
I happen to be an Everton fan on the blue half of Liverpool, but I don't begrudge Liverpool a success. I actually believe they deserve it because they've played the best football. Now, at the end of the day, I think it's going to give a real lift to the city.
It took 3 decades to rebuild enough to put Liverpool back on their perch. And with a renewed sense of belief and a manager who says he's here to stay, they'll be difficult to knock off again. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Liverpool.
Let's take a look now at what the weather's up to. And a cooler and fresher weekend is on the cards following Friday's thundery breakdown. After another hot and humid day for many, there'll be further torrential downpours this evening, especially across parts of northern England and southern Scotland. Thunderstorms will continue to push northwards overnight with frequent lightning and hail. Again, it'll be another muggy and sticky one for most of us, although slightly fresher in the south and the west. Early heavy rain and residual thunderstorms will slowly clear the northeast on Saturday to leave a much cooler and fresher feeling day. It'll be breezy with showers or longer spells of rain and just a few sunny spells. Some of the showers will be heavy during the afternoon, with the heaviest and most persistent rain likely to affect parts of Scotland and Ireland. The rest of the weekend will be cooler, breezier and unsettled, with showers or longer spells of rain, especially for Scotland, northwest England and Northern Ireland. You're watching Sky News. Coming up, we'll have the latest from Glasgow on today's attack at a city centre hotel.
That's coming up next on Sky News. Well, now for the story behind the headline. I'm Dermot Manahan and I'm the new host of the Sky News Daily Podcast, bringing you news and in-depth analysis from our team of specialists. I'll be joined by our experts to delve into the stories that matter to you. Trusted news with no agenda. The Sky News Daily Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
You're watching Sky News. Our top stories here this evening. 6 men, including a police officer, are receiving treatment in hospital after being stabbed in a knife attack in Glasgow. The perpetrator was shot dead by police. Into the owner of 17 shopping centres in the United Kingdom has collapsed into administration, putting more than 100,000 jobs at risk. And the Prime Minister has said that people are taking too many liberties as people continue to pack beaches and hold unlicensed street parties. Labour said the government had lost control of messaging. Well, let's get more then on that attack in Scotland's biggest city. I'm joined now by the MP for Glasgow Central, Alison Fewlis. Thanks very much indeed for joining us here this evening, Alison Fewlis. A really terrible day for Glasgow today. Your thoughts tonight?
I'm just in complete shock, along with everybody else in Glasgow, that something like this could happen in the city centre. My thoughts are very much with the 6 people that are in hospital tonight, and with the families of those that have been affected.
Well, yes, and tell us a little bit more about the area where it happened. Seeing this is your patch, explain to us a little bit more about where it happened.
Well, this is a hotel just behind me in the city centre. It's usually, in normal times, a very busy part of the town, but understandably, because of the lockdown, it's much quieter today than it would be in normal circumstances.
Well, yes, and police have been keen to stress for some hours now that the situation is contained, there's no danger to the general public, and they've also said that they don't consider it to be a terror attack. No comfort, of course, for those caught up in the attack earlier today, but do you think that will provide some reassurance to the people of the city there?
I think everybody would be glad to hear that it's not a terror attack, but that doesn't downplay how serious this was for those involved, for the police officer that's been involved, and for those other people that have been injured in this attack. It's still been a horrendous experience for people within a hotel who would also be quite vulnerable already from the experiences that they've had that have brought them to this city.
Well, yes, and let's talk a little bit more about that, because as you refer to there, the hotel where this happened has been used to house asylum seekers and refugees during the pandemic, hasn't it? And while I should stress that we don't know at this stage anything about the attacker or their motive, it does put a spotlight again on that policy, which has proved pretty contentious there, hasn't it? People concerned about the way in which people were moved en masse into hotels, worried about the conditions perhaps being inappropriate, raising concerns about mental health of those put into the hotels. Are those concerns that you've been sharing?
They are concerns I've been sharing, yes. Myself and my Glasgow colleagues have been very concerned about the situation for people who've been uprooted from homes in which they felt settled at the start of the lockdown and moved with very little notice en masse by Mears, the accommodation provider, the accommodation provider of the Home Office, into hotels within the city centre area. During that time, people have not necessarily had access to any money. They've been had very little choice in what they've been able to eat and where they've been able to go. And we have raised continual concerns, as have other organisations that work with refugees and asylum seekers within the city of Glasgow, about the conditions that people are living in. It's been incredibly stressful for some of the people that have been in touch with me, and I do worry for those people that are in accommodation in hotels still, and I think it's up to the Home Office and to Mears to answer now whether these people are going to have to stay in hotels for the time being, or whether they can finally go back to their own homes.
Well, yes, and Mears have said that people were being safely and appropriately housed in accordance with health authority guidance. But what would you like to see happening to people in these hotels next?
Well, I think I would very much contest, as have many people contested, what Mears have said. And if it was you or I being asked to be uplifted from your home, removed from your community where you felt safe, and then moved with hundreds of other people into a hotel in the city centre with no money or means of support, you would say that that was inadequate and that wouldn't be respecting your own rights. So I think there are serious questions there to be asked and to be answered by the Home Office and by Mears on this. And I think they have to give careful consideration in the weeks and months ahead about how they can return people to the homes and the communities where they felt safe and where they built up links and roots.
A quick word on the police as well. They've been praised tonight for their bravery, and one police officer is amongst the 6 injured currently in hospital. We do understand that unarmed police went in before armed police were on the scene. Are you confident that police are adequately protected? Do you have any concerns about whether more police should be armed?
I think that's an operational matter for the police. And I think they have said today that the armed police arrived on the scene incredibly quickly, as did the original officers who went in so bravely to deal with a situation that was unfolding very quickly. And I would also like to thank the paramedics and the ambulance staff who came on the scene again very, very quickly to aid those who had been injured and to make sure that they got to hospital as quickly as possible.
Well, Alison Pulis, we appreciate your time here this evening. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us tonight.
Thank you.
The United States Vice President Mike Pence has called on Americans to embrace social distancing after confirming that 16 states are seeing an increase in cases of COVID-19. Texas and Florida have shut bars because of the rise in infections.
We've made progress, but as we are reminded as we see cases rising across the South, that we still have work to do. And so we say to every American, particularly those in counties and in states that are being impacted by rising cases, that now's the time for everybody to continue to do their part. And I think you'll hear from this podium today a particular message to younger Americans across the Sun Belt, and the role that you can play in protecting the vulnerable.
The Labour leader, Keir Starmer, has dismissed calls by left-wingers in his party to reinstate Rebecca Long-Bailey as Shadow Education Secretary. Long-Bailey was sacked for refusing to take down a tweet linking to an article which Labour said contained an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Campaigners have called for an investigation into the effect of tiny pieces of plastic after studies found them in fruit and vegetables. A study in the journal Environmental Research said that apples and carrots were the most contaminated and that estimated daily intakes of microplastics for adults and children were worrying, though lower than from drinking mineral water in plastic bottles. Tomorrow marks Global Pride 2020. In Western Europe, the marches and rallies have become a glorious and colourful celebration of diversity. But in some countries, being gay can still mean persecution. Sky News has spoken to one bisexual woman from Chechnya who says she was beaten by Islamic healers and kept in a psychiatric clinic against her will. Sky's Moscow correspondent Diana Magnay reports.
Чеченское общество, оно очень табуировано и ультраконсервативно. Закрытое такое пространство, в котором человек никак себя не может выражать.
Aminat Losonova fled Chechnya last year. She's bisexual, and she says she was beaten by Islamic healers, kept in a psychiatric clinic against her will, and drugged there and by her own family because of her sexual orientation.
Я понимала, что они никогда не прекратят свои издевательства надо мной. И поэтому я уже как 5-й раз предпринимала 5-ю попытку побега.
These two activists from Russia's LGBT network helped her escape to a country that we can't name, and they're working with her on the case she's filed against her parents and the individuals she says abused her.
В принципе, в 2019 год было большое количество женщин, которые к нам обращались за помощью. Мне кажется, даже такой год, который больше, чем предыдущий, в принципе. То есть побеги — это огромные риски для нее, потому что если ее вернут, то практически шансов на то, что ее оставят живых, у нее нет.
Chechnya's capital Grozny is a glittering modern city, the mosque the jewel at its heart. The main artery named after Vladimir Putin, a catwalk for glamorous Chechen women. Gender roles are mapped out here. Women will marry. For men, fighting and mixed martial arts is a way of life after childhood spent during 2 vicious separatist wars. We came here just before lockdown to find out what it's like for LGBT women living in a part of Russia where women cannot even get a passport without the consent of a male relative. Mikhail Engiev has spent his life defending human rights in Chechnya. He and his staff have faced numerous threats for the work that they do. But he says he doesn't believe there are gay women in the Chechen Republic.
Нет, я, например, не думаю, что здесь подобное есть вообще.
Я никогда не слышал, и это сложно представить в нашем обществе. Это вообще невозможно даже представить.
But they do exist. In Moscow last year, we met a couple who had managed to escape and were trying to flee Russia. They did not want to show their faces and told us that Chechen security officials were trying to blackmail them.
Мне посчастливилось уехать из Чечни еще до первой волны гонения геев и трансгендеров в Чечне, но это меня не спасло. Все равно меня нашли и угрожают.
They told us about the Islamic Medical Center in Grozny. The LGBT network say lesbians are often brought here to try and convert them to heterosexual life by exorcising their demons. It's a center for traditional Islamic medicine, where exorcisms are standard. This doctor had agreed to show us around.
Здесь богослов читает Коран. Если какие-то симптомы, проявления есть у человека, да, там после чтения Корана, я позже расскажу, что это. Если какие-то проявления есть, то они уже на втором этаже в индивидуальном порядке у целителя дальше продолжают свое лечение.
We had hoped we could ask him about women brought here for conversion therapy because of their sexuality. But then he receives a phone call and we're told to leave. The director is close to Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov and he hasn't had approval from the top.
Одержимость джиннами – это состояние...
This ad on Chechen TV shows an exorcism in process, a way to restore harmony, the advert suggests, if you're having problems with your wife. Losonova says that what happened to her was brutal.
Он избивал меня область солнечного сплетения. Тем самым он говорил, что изгоняет из меня джинна. Он бил меня туда тонкой палочкой в течение часа. Это было больно. И кричал мне в ухо Коран.
The Chechen Investigative Committee has assigned a number to Losonova's case, but there is a culture of impunity here. The Kadyrov regiment, for example, behind these walls, is notorious for torture and unlawful detentions. So here on the left you have the headquarters of the Kadyrov regiment, and on the right there in that yellow building is the headquarters of the local investigative committee, which goes some way to explaining why there has been such a failure to investigate or prosecute allegations of torture by law enforcement officials in Chechnya.
Платье хочу себе шить на весну или на лето.
These three aren't confident that the case will go anywhere, but by speaking out, they hope Lorsonova shows others that they're not alone, that however difficult it is, there can be a way out.
Я бы хотела получить образование.
Diana Magnay, Sky News, Grozny, Chechnya.
Хорошую карьеру, работу.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, why Formula One is distancing itself from the sports ex-boss Bernie Ecclestone.
That's coming up next on Sky News. Well, now for the story behind the headline. I'm Dermot Manahan and I'm the new host of the Sky News Daily Podcast, bringing you news and in-depth analysis from our team of specialists. I'll be joined by our experts to delve into the stories that matter to you. Trusted news with no agenda. The Sky News Daily Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Having a party.
I'm having a party, a girls' party. Yeah, where are your drinks, girls?
It is nothing short but an amazing day today.
I wake up, sleep, eat, wake up, sleep, eat.
My name's Tony Nicholson. I'm a fitness coach and I'm an actor.
Goes with coffee? No. Goes with coffee? No.
Did you know pollen can get into your home via your clothes and pets? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Saturday will see spells of rain and windy conditions spread northeastwards across Ireland, England and Wales with some heavy downpours. At the same time, there will be heavy and thundery showers again, especially across the north and west of the UK as well as Ireland. It'll be a cooler day than of late for most places too. As a result, grass pollen levels will be a little lower than recently, but still at a moderate to high risk for most places on Saturday.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Time now to take you over to Sky Sports News for an update from Emma.
That's it, good.
This programme is brought to you by Vitality. However you do it, getting active brings its own rewards.
Great dig. She's hardly scratched the surface.
Hello, good evening. Formula One has criticised remarks made by the sport's former boss, Bernie Ecclestone, that black people were often more racist than white people. Ecclestone made the remarks in an interview with the American broadcaster CNN. He also said he was surprised to hear Lewis Hamilton had been affected by racist issues in the sport. A statement from Formula One said the comments had no place in sport or society.
People ought to think a little bit and think, what the hell? Somebody's not the same as white people, they're black, and the black people should think the same thing about white people. Because I think in lots of cases, black people are more racist than what white people are. I don't think anyone's bothered about it before. They're too busy trying to win races or find sponsors or something, really other things of little if any interest. I'm surprised if anyone in Formula One, certainly the teams and the people like the promoters, have any concern about this.
Now, could Brentford be playing in the Premier League next season? They improved their chances of promotion from the Championship after beating the leaders West Brom. Ollie Watkins scored the only goal after 16 minutes. Brentford now to third, that's 5 points behind second place Leeds. Well, Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp says the club's success is far from over after clinching their first league title in 30 years. Klopp has had some time to reflect today after a night of celebrating. The title is the club's 19th overall, but their first since 1990.
We had a good moment, obviously. We're all young enough to still go for something. This is not the final destination. This is not what we said if when we all finish our careers. So this is a moment like last year Champions League final. The year before, the Champions League final was a moment. So from that moment on, you carry on. That's what we will do now.
Now, another golfer has tested positive for coronavirus. The American Denny McCarthy has withdrawn from this week's Travelers' Championship in Connecticut. He's the third player now to contract the disease since the tour in America restarted 2 weeks ago. Rory McIlroy is playing in the event. The world number one is making steady progress today. On day 2, he's moved to 9 under par. That is 3 shots off the lead. Now, the Super League season is returning to Sky Sports more than 4 months after it was suspended because of coronavirus. The competition will resume on August the 2nd with 3 matches initially, including the champion St Helens against Catalan's Dragons. All games will be played behind closed doors.
We've been working really hard on this for a number of weeks. We've just had a very long board meeting where we got support for that, support for a calendar. Real positive news. Fans can be really excited about seeing Super League back on Sky in just 5 or 6 weeks' time.
There's more now over on Sky Sports News. We're back in the next hour.
this is called an exercise mat. Ooh, feel the burn.
Emma, thanks very much indeed. Now then, let's check on the weather for the weekend. Well, a cooler and fresher weekend is on the cards following Friday's thundery breakdown. It'll be a mild and rather sticky start for some of us on Saturday morning, with overnight thunderstorms clearing northwards. After any residual thunderstorms clear the northeast, it's set to be a much cooler and fresher feeling day. It'll be breezy with showers or longer spells of rain and just a few sunny spells. Some of the showers will be heavy during the afternoon, with the heaviest and most persistent rain likely to affect parts of Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, the rest of the weekend will be cooler, breezier and unsettled, with showers or longer spells of rain on Sunday, especially for Western Scotland, Northwest England and Northern Ireland. And then looking ahead to next week, little change on Monday with further spells of rain in the north. Elsewhere, it'll be cool and breezy with some sunshine and showers. So the first of tomorrow's front pages are in, so let's just show you a few of them. The Mirror is the first one. It's leading with the travel traffic light system, reporting that summer holidays to Europe will be allowed from the first week of July without quarantine, they say. Meanwhile, the Financial Times goes with the failed payments company Wirecard and what it calls the failure of the firm's auditors, Ernst & Young, to spot the problem. Don't forget, we'll be going through all the front pages in our press preview as usual at 10:30 and 11:30 when we're going through the rest of the front pages and discussing them then, so do join us for that. Meanwhile, coming up next on Sky News at 10, we'll have all the latest from Glasgow on today's attack at a city centre hotel in which 6 people were seriously injured, including a policeman. All the latest on that and the rest of the top stories coming up at 10.
Nothing short, but an amazing day today.
I wake up, sleep, eat, wake up, sleep, eat.
My name's Tony Nicholson. I'm a fitness coach. I'm an actor.
Want some coffee? No. You want some coffee?
10 o'clock, this is Sky News at 10, our top story. 6 men stabbed and 1 shot dead at a hotel in Glasgow. A police officer is in a critical condition. The attacker is shot dead by police, but the incident is not being treated as terrorism.
I mean, this is what you dread as a police officer going into a scene like this. And, you know, again, it's something which police officers have to do. We have to walk into danger.
Also tonight, don't take liberties with lockdown. Boris Johnson warns people not to ignore social distancing guidelines. 10,000s of jobs at risk after the owner of some of Britain's biggest shopping centres collapses into administration. You may never be released. 15 years for the teenager who threw a 6-year-old boy 100 feet from the top of Tate Modern. Making his mark, Liverpool pays tribute to Jurgen Klopp after he leads the team to its first Premier League title for 30 years. And we'll take a look at tomorrow's front pages in the press preview at 10:30. Hello, good evening. A police officer is in a critical condition tonight after he was stabbed at a hotel in Glasgow. He's one of 6 men who were injured in an attack in the city centre. The youngest was just 17. All are now receiving treatment in hospital. The attacker was shot dead at the scene after armed officers stormed the hotel. Police say there is no ongoing danger to the public and the incident is not being treated as terrorism. But tonight, Boris Johnson and Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon both thanked police for their bravery. From Glasgow, our Scotland correspondent James Matthews reports.
Friday lunchtime in the centre of Glasgow. This was a chaotic, harrowing scene. Armed police officers rushed to the Park Inn. Inside the hotel, he shot a man dead, but not before a number of people had been stabbed. Witnesses heard at least 1 shot fired and spoke of a blood-strewn scene.
When I went down, about to take the lift, inside the lift it was covered with blood. So I did not take the lift, I went down to the stairs. When I went down to the stairs, that's where I saw the whole reception area was covered with blood. So what happened was, I saw that one of the reception got stabbed and he was lying behind the desk of the reception, behind the receptionist's desk. He was lying and he was gasping for air.
Witnesses spoke of stab victims inside and outside the building. Paramedics in protective suits treated casualties on the pavement.
We kind of just heard everything in the window and within a few minutes went downstairs to see what was actually happening. I could see someone lying on a curb, but I wasn't sure whether they'd been hit with a brake or something like that. And then when we saw them on the steps, they were bleeding from the torso and fortunately lost their life.
Police said the 6 people injured included a 42-year-old male police officer, taken to hospital with stab wounds and in a critical condition.
This has been a dreadful afternoon for the city of Glasgow, particularly for those who have been directly involved. Those injured, obviously, but there will have been people who witnessed this afternoon, particularly in the location of this incident, quite horrific events. And I think I will not be alone across Scotland tonight, thinking of everybody who has in any way been affected by what unfolded.
As armed officers left the scene, Police Scotland ruled out terrorism as a factor and issued a statement on events inside the Park Inn and those involved.
Officers were on the scene within 2 minutes and armed officers shortly afterwards, and the incident was quickly contained. A man was shot by armed police and has subsequently died. 6 other men are in hospital for treatment, including a 42-year-old police officer who is in a critical but stable condition.
The Park Inn is one of a number of hotels in this city used to house asylum seekers and refugees since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Campaigners on their behalf have long complained that they have been living in intolerable conditions, which were having a significant impact on their mental health.
we don't support asylum seekers being housed in hotels. I wrote to the Home Office and to Mears when they started to do that at the start of this lockdown period. But having said that, it is speculation. We don't know yet, and we can't say now at this point that that has anything to do with what happened today.
Investigations into what happened here will continue long after the scene here has cleared. Those inquiries are for the longer term. The more immediate concern is coming to terms with the carnage that unfolded on this city centre street.
So let's take a closer look at exactly what happened in Glasgow earlier. The police first responded to a report of an incident at the Park Inn Hotel in West George Street at 12:50. As James was reporting, witnesses said they heard screams from the reception area of the hotel, with one person seen injured behind the desk and another on the front steps of the building, both gasping for air. Police were on the scene within 2 minutes and armed police arrived shortly afterwards. The attacker was shot dead at the scene shortly after officers entered the building. Several people were then taken to hospital for treatment, including the 42-year-old police officer who remains in a critical condition tonight. The other men being treated in hospital are aged 17, 18, 20, 38 and 52. Well, let's go back to James Matthews. He's in Glasgow for us tonight. So, James, what will the focus of the investigation be now?
The focus will be, I suppose, why did this happen in the first place? And that is a question that may never be answered, given that the perpetrator was shot dead. I can tell you, Anna, it's a marked contrast. West George Street in Glasgow tonight, very quiet here. A marked contrast with the scene around lunchtime today, when something like 20 police vehicles were present, paramedics in protective suits, and armed officers storming that Park Inn hotel, having been called to the scene. Obviously very challenging for the police officers involved, and tonight the officer injured has been named as 42-year-old Constable David White. He's said to be seriously injured but stable and is being treated in hospital as one of the 6 who emerged injured from this incident. There will be investigations into the perpetrator, into the way that this event was handled. It's a matter of routine that when shots are fired on a police job, then Scotland's police watchdog will look into the full circumstances. That will take place. But ultimately, I suppose they will ask, why did it happen? They will speak to the people who knew the perpetrator, people inside the Park Inn hotel, and they were largely, if not exclusively, asylum seekers and refugees. What happened at the start of the coronavirus pandemic was that asylum seekers were taken from their places of residence at that time and handed into city hotels. Campaigners on their behalf say that was a very bad idea, that it took a toll on their mental health, that it was stressful, and the conditions had a significant impact on their mental stability. So perhaps the conversation and the investigation goes there in the long term, but for now it's a question of getting to grips and just taking in, I suppose, what happened today, and wishing the best. As has Scotland's First Minister, and tonight Chief Constable Ian Livingston of Police Scotland has echoed those words, sending his respects to those injured, respects to the officers who dealt with the incident, and also telling people to avoid turning out for organised demonstrations in Glasgow, which were planned for tomorrow, out of respect, he says, for those who were injured.
James Matthews, thank you. Some breaking news now, and the government is set to announce arrangements that would allow people to travel to some European countries over the summer. Well, Sky's Ali Fitzgerald is in Downing Street for us now. So, Ali, what details do we have?
Well, we knew that the government were going to be reviewing this on Monday. We suspected we may hear something sooner, but the front pages of most of the papers this evening reporting that air bridges will be happening with France, Greece and Spain, among other countries. So obviously, that looks like good news for anyone hoping to go on holiday, good news certainly for the aviation industry that, as we know, had a very difficult few months. And I'm sure this will also be something that will be welcomed by many Tory backbench MPs who've long been putting pressure on the government to start to ease those quarantine restrictions. I think the next question will be which countries are not on the list, and we expect to get that list in full early next week. There is some talk in the papers that countries like Portugal that have had a recent outbreak may not be on the list, that there will be some sort of traffic light system, green, yellow, red, to decide which countries are most at risk. So there are still plenty of details that we expect to come out over the coming days, and the exact timings of when this quarantine will be lifted for those countries. But I think things certainly seem to be moving in the right direction for any holiday makers hoping to go on holiday this summer.
Thanks very much indeed. And as Ali was saying there, that story featuring in many of tomorrow's papers. There's the headline in the Times: holiday season back on, they say. We're going to be taking a look at all the front pages in our press preview at 10:30 with the columnist at the Irish News, Alison Morris, and the content editor at City AM, Rachel Cunliffe. Despite those plans to ease travel restrictions, the Prime Minister said today that people are taking too many liberties with social distancing. Boris Johnson was speaking after several days where large crowds have gathered as the UK begins to ease out of lockdown. 186 more people died with COVID-19 today, and the government is concerned that if people fail to stick to the rules, there could be a new spike in coronavirus cases. Ashna Harinag reports the growing concerns about people breaking lockdown.
From an illegal party on Streatham Common to celebrations marking a 30-year victory at Anfield, all scenes that threaten a virus resurgence. Day trippers to the south coast also ignored distancing yesterday, with the beach looking like this. The Prime Minister, who when easing restrictions trusted the British people to use their common sense, today slammed those flouting the rules.
People taking too many liberties with the guidance, mingling too much, not observing social distance. So some parts of the world, I won't name them, but you've got spikes, really serious spikes in the incidence of the disease.
Advice now heeded by sunseekers in Bournemouth, who were more careful.
And if it gets too busy here today, we're going to go. We've been here since 9 o'clock this morning, and there was no one here.
I think the weather was getting a bit better, well, a bit cooler. Wouldn't be as crazy with all the stuff going on yesterday. Thought it would be a bit more safe to come down, so come down today.
It's these beauty spots which are likely to suffer the most, as extra visitors mean added pressure for local hospitals.
Yesterday, we had patients who couldn't get to the hospital to have a swab before they could come in for their elective procedure because of the traffic on our road, and it just makes me really sad.
The government hasn't ruled out regional lockdowns if infections spike. In Wales, though, the First Minister said packed beaches which did threaten the easing of lockdown completely.
Oh my God.
Officers in Notting Hill also suffered at the hands of street party revellers when the crowd attacked officers breaking up their illegal fun.
It's hot. Some people have drunk far too much. Some people are just angry and aggressive, and some people are plain violent. We will be prepared this weekend. We have officers all over London working hard again to try to keep the peace.
Oh wow, we're having so much fun!
As COVID-19 deaths clamber past 42,000, the relaxing of lockdown has to be gentle. But a tug of war is raging as the government tries to tame weeks of pent-up public frustration and keep us safe. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
More than 100,000 jobs are at risk tonight after the owner of some of the UK's biggest shopping centres collapsed into administration. Into, which runs the Trafford Centre in Manchester, Gateshead's Metro Centre and Lakeside in Essex, has been struggling with debts of more than £4 billion and has been hit hard by the collapse in shopping during the coronavirus pandemic. From Manchester, Katerina Vitozzi reports.
This is what you see when you arrive at the Trafford Shopping Centre. Its classical features suggest strength, power and permanence. But today, Into, the company that owns it, went into administration. The biggest corporate casualty so far of the COVID-19 lockdown. Into is Britain's biggest shopping mall owner, with 17 centres in total. 2,500 people are employed by the company directly. A further 30,000 are involved in the company's supply chains. and 100,000 work in their tenants' stores, making it a significant regional employer and now a significant regional problem.
The Trafford Centre is a destination of national significance. So, of course, any interruption to business is economically damaging. And we would also be working very hard to support both those who run the Trafford Centre and the businesses who operate within it.
But the shopping centre's mainly young retail workforce don't want reassurances, they want jobs.
I love working in the Trafford Centre. Like, I've worked here for about a year and a half, and it's just such a nice place to work, always full of like so many people, but kind of be sad if we lost our job as well, because just all my friends and everything, but I don't know, we're all just kind of hoping for the best, really.
We've been open for 2 weeks now, and to be told that, oh yeah, we might be closing down again, it's just kind of, you just don't know what's going on. You don't know if you're just like dipping in and out all the time, or what's going to happen.
During lockdown, high street shops, there's nothing to match the size and the scale of the Into shopping centres, and its closure would be the starkest warning yet of the problems to come for the retail sector. Into, like other retail players, had been struggling for years, burdened first by debt and then the lockdown slowdown.
It's going to be an extremely complex administration. If you think about what Into does, it keeps these shopping centres open, it provides the services, the lighting, the cleaning, etc. So the suggestion is there's going to need to be about £12 million put on the table just to keep these shopping centres alive.
For now, Into says its shopping centres will remain open. Its prime retail space could be tempting for new buyers, but in this post-COVID climate, that's far from certain. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News in Greater Manchester.
A teenager who threw a 6-year-old boy 100 feet from the viewing gallery of the Tate Modern in London has been jailed for at least 15 years. The boy's parents spoke after the sentencing about the horror and pain felt by their family and how hard it was to explain what had happened to their son. Our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, reports.
Mentally ill and violent, John T. Bravery told his carers he wanted to hurt or kill someone. Alone and unsupervised at the Tate Modern Art Gallery, he carried out his threat. He grabbed a 6-year-old boy, threw him 100 feet from a viewing gantry, and almost killed him. Witnesses said he shrugged and laughed at what he'd just done. He told the boy's father, "Yes, I am mad." After seeing the attacker jailed, the detective read a statement from the young boy's family.
The act by this individual against our son is unspeakable. Words cannot express the horror and the fear that his actions have brought upon us and our son, who is now wondering why he's in hospital. How can one explain to a child that someone deliberately tried to kill him? From what the doctor said, he has many years of physiotherapy ahead of him, and we have no prospects or plan for the future other than being by his side.
The boy, on holiday from France, suffered multiple fractures and a bleed on his brain.
He is still in a wheelchair today, wears splints on his left arm and both his legs, and spends his days in a corset moulded to his waist, sat in his wheelchair. The nights are always extremely difficult. His sleep is very agitated. He is in pain. He wakes up many times and he cries.
John T. Bravery has autism spectrum disorder, a behavioural condition, but the judge said that did not explain his attack on the boy. Mrs. Justice McGowan told him the fear he must have experienced and the horror his parents felt are beyond imagination. You had intended to kill someone that day. You almost killed that 6-year-old boy. You will spend the greater part, if not all, of your life detained. You may never be released. Social services had been supervising the teenager since he was a juvenile. He was in supported accommodation but allowed out alone for 4 hours at a time. The council said the case was being reviewed and it would learn from the findings. John T. Bravery is being treated at Broadmoor Secure Hospital. His parents said they could never forgive him, but felt they had been let down by the system. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
During the pandemic, coronavirus has torn through care homes with frightening speed, taking tens of thousands of lives. Sky News has been reporting from inside care homes throughout the pandemic, looking at how the elderly have been treated. And there are growing concerns that some people could have been saved. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin reports on the crucial questions around who should get hospital treatment and deciding who dies.
Muriel Woolley has got a chest infection and she's struggling to breathe. Her family want her to have medical treatment, but a GP has decided that she's got to stay in this care home and that she has reached the end of her life.
So this is my mum's care home, Rossberg House. This was as close as I could get. At this point we knew she needed the hospital, she needed the help. But unfortunately she wasn't given that chance.
In the middle of a national health emergency, doctors have made decisions about who should get treatment and who shouldn't. In March, early April, some health trusts and GP surgeries, out of the blue, start to ring relatives whose family members are in care homes to tell them should they need hospital treatment during the pandemic. They won't receive it. Relatives were asked to support the completion of a Do Not Resuscitate form called DNARs, which meant their relatives wouldn't be brought back to life if they needed it. And it wasn't just the elderly who were targeted in this way. Lisa Briggs has experienced this twice. Her brother Tony Sweeney is 51 and has cerebral palsy. The care home he's a resident in was asked to put a DNAR on him should he contract COVID-19.
I'm absolutely appalled. I think to put a DNR on everybody, on even old people is awful, but on my brother, who is very young at heart, he has a lot to live, I think it's an absolute disgrace. When I found out the home had said, that there was no way they were going to do a DNR on a 51-year-old and that they've got other young people, I was really pleased about that. I thought, I'm glad that somebody's sticking up for them.
Then, during a phone call with a GP, Lisa was asked about a DNA on her mum, Margaret Sweeney, also a resident in the same care home.
She does have COVID and she needed oxygen, then she won't be able to have it. She said it would be too much for it to be uncomfortable, and that's when I said, well, I'd rather be uncomfortable than dead.
NHS England say that blanket DNARs should never have been used by health trusts and GPs and described them as inappropriate. The Department for Health and Social Care say that care and treatment for any individual should be based on an informed discussion between the patient and their treating clinician. Dr. Eileen Burns is a consultant who specialises in the care of the elderly.
So as a society, we do value the lives of younger people more than older people, and I think across society, most people would feel that that's right.
Because of that, the system was stacked against the elderly.
The system was certainly stacked against older people in care homes.
It's perhaps too early to establish the true toll that COVID has had on the elderly. The virus has exposed weaknesses in social care, but it may also tell us a great deal about society's attitude to the old and how some were treated in this pandemic. Nick Martin, Sky News.
President Trump has cancelled a planned visit to his golf resort in New Jersey this weekend without any explanation. Trump visited Arizona on Tuesday, which is one of several states that have reported record rises in cases this week. The White House denied the change in plan was related to New Jersey requirements that visitors from states with high infection rates quarantine for 14 days. Labour leader Keir Starmer has dismissed calls by left-wingers in his party to reinstate Rebecca Long-Bailey after she was sacked for refusing to take down a tweet linking to an article which Labour said contained an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Mr Starmer held a conference call with members of the campaign group of MPs but said his mind was made up. Campaigners have called for an investigation into the effect of tiny pieces of plastic after studies found them in fruit and vegetables. A study in the journal Environmental Research said that apples and carrots were the most contaminated and that estimated daily intakes of microplastics for adults and children were worrying, though lower than from drinking mineral water in plastic bottles. NHS England has apologised after an investigation by Sky News revealed that fewer than a quarter of its trusts had carried out a assessment for black and Asian staff. Two separate reports have suggested that people from minorities are more at risk of dying from COVID-19 than white people, especially amongst healthcare workers and carers. It was a Rashid report on the failure of NHS risk assessments.
It was meant to be a great leveller, infecting a prince to hospital porters, but COVID-19 is killing one group disproportionately in our community and within our health service. Sky News analysis found that 75% of all healthcare staff that have died from COVID-19 are from a black, Asian and minority ethnic background. Stark numbers like this led NHS to advise all trusts to risk assess their BAME staff at the end of April.
Agreed for the past 3-4 months has been COVID, but
2 months on from that instruction, NHS staff like this consultant and many of his colleagues have still not formally risk assessed.
To be honest with you, I'm absolutely fuming, and I suspect that a lot of colleagues will be absolutely furious as well. This is an institutionally and structurally racist organisation, and certain groups of people are not prioritised, and they're not treated the same. If this was an illness that affected preferentially Caucasians, it would be a different story.
In fact, Sky can reveal that many vulnerable non-white NHS staff right across the country have still not been risk assessed despite guidance from the very top. We contacted 221 NHS trusts in England to find out if they risk assessed all of their BAME staff as recommended. 149 of those trusts came back to us, but from that group, only 23% said they had risk assessed all of their BAME staff. But one former hospital CEO says the task is too big and could lead to huge logistical issues.
I don't know a CEO of a trust who does not take this seriously and does not want to do it. But because of the numbers involved and the complexity of doing it, it's a mammoth task and it will take time.
Just this week, in a letter, NHS bosses urged trusts to complete risk assessments within a month. And today, the Chief People Officer apologised to those who haven't been assessed.
The FOI results are disappointing. So let's be clear that this is protecting our staff is the number one priority of the NHS. It's the number one priority of any employer because there's not only a legal requirement to provide health and safety at work, there's also the moral requirement to do that.
We are expecting a convening of COVID-19 and questions remain whether some of the most vulnerable people tasked with protecting our lives will be fully assessed to protect theirs. Inzamam Rashid, Sky News.
Liverpool's legendary manager Bill Shankly famously said that he wanted to bring happiness to the people of Liverpool. Well, today, the red half of Merseyside has been bursting with joy because, after 30 years, Anfield is once again home to the champions of England. And the man who brought this latest success has promised more to come, as our sports correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
This is what the party looks like when you've won the Premier League for the first time. The celebrations at the Liverpool Hotel went on until almost breakfast time. The manager Jurgen Klopp showing his feet not quite as sharp as his football brain, but he was surprisingly fresh-faced the next morning. First of all, congratulations, Jurgen. Speaking to the people of Liverpool, they seem to have a fondness for you that goes beyond football. Do you feel that closeness, and can you explain why that is?
I feel very close to the city, even when I cannot go in the city. I love the way they see the life. I love the way they want to be different, are different, but are very special in a very good way. And we both come from a region where we speak a pretty strong, strange dialect. So where I'm coming from, nobody understands well outside that, and that's with Klaus pretty similar.
He arrived in Merseyside 4.5 years ago, a hot property in football management, but without the ego of others.
I'm a totally normal guy. I'm the normal one, maybe, if you want this.
It's proved a perfect match. The 53-year-old from Germany's Black Forest, taking Liverpool from 10th in the league to the title. Look at Jurgen Klopp! He also shares their socialist principles and values.
What about Jurgen Klopp? He's just a fantastic, amazing human being. He's now immortal in this city.
He's part of the fence, you know. He's an adopted scouser now, you know what I mean? So everyone loves him.
I love that man. I have the same bait. I even emailed him and he hasn't answered me. I'm gutted we put that up. Jurgen, answer me, please.
It's significantly quieter at Anfield than it was on Thursday night. People have been understandably criticised for gathering here in their hundreds when lockdown is still on. What's also understandable though is that physical feeling of excitement. Football's not just a game here, it's a way of life.
It's also been a welcome boost to an economy hit hard by industrial and manufacturing decline. Few understand the significance of football better than them.
I happen to be an Everton fan on the blue half of Liverpool, but I don't begrudge Liverpool as success. I actually believe they deserve it because they're playing the best football. At the end of the day, I think that it's going to give a real lift to the city.
It took 3 decades to rebuild enough to put Liverpool back on their perch, and with a renewed sensibility and a manager who says he's here to stay, they'll be difficult to knock off fame. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Liverpool.
Well, that was news. Coming up, we've got the press preview for you as we take you through Saturday's papers. This is what's on the front of tomorrow's newspaper. Traffic light system for foreign travel is the headline there. That story in a lot of the papers. We're going to be talking about that and plenty else as well tonight with the columnist at the Irish News, Alison Morris, and the comment editor at City AM. They are standing by. We'll be with them in just a moment.
That's coming up next on Sky News. Well, now for the story behind the headline. I'm Dermot Manahan and I'm the new host of the Sky News Daily Podcast, bringing you news and in-depth analysis from our team of specialists. I'll be joined by our experts to delve into the stories that matter to you. Trusted news with no agenda. The Sky News Daily Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Watching Sky News, in just a moment, the press preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, our top stories here tonight. And a police officer is in a critical condition after he and 5 other people were injured in a knife attack in Glasgow. The main suspect was shot dead by police. It's not being treated as terrorism. The Prime Minister has said that people are taking too many liberties in lockdown as people continue to pack beaches and hold unlicensed street parties. And Into, the owner of 17 shopping centres in the United Kingdom, has collapsed into administration, putting more than 100,000 jobs at risk. Hello there. The press review. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we'll see what's making the headlines tonight with Rachel Cunliffe and Alison Morris. So good to see you both. Those front pages, and the Scotsman leads with the stabbings in Glasgow that left the attacker shot dead by police and 6 other people in hospital. Its headline: Horror at the Park Inn. Fly out for Sun Sea and 70% off. The Mail goes with news that air bridges will soon be up and running, and we can then start booking bargain price foreign holidays, they say. The Eye leads with the new travel traffic light system, reporting that summer holidays to Europe will be allowed from the first week of July without quarantine. For the Daily Mirror.